It all started with a bad oyster, or maybe it was a dodgy prawn. Honestly, the specific shellfish that brought down the theatrical titan Sylvia Stone doesn't matter. What mattered was the phone call that came at 6:30 in the evening, just as the electric hum of a London opening night was reaching its crescendo backstage. I was in my dressing room, a space roughly the size of a broom closet with a mirror that had seen better days, when my phone buzzed with the director's name, Mark. My name is Iris, and for the last 3 years and 107 performances, I've been the shadow, the echo, the understudy for Sylvia Stone in the Broadway smash hit The Last Letter. To the audience, I was a name in small print at the back of the playbill. To the cast, I was a ghost who haunted the wings, mouthing their lines. To Sylvia, I was something less than that. I was a nuisance, a walking reminder of her own mortality, and she treated me with a special kind of contempt reserved for furniture that gets in your way. She would forget to tell me about blocking changes, sending me stumbling into the wrong spot during a rehearsal. She'd make passive-aggressive comments about my costume fitting, just loudly enough for the wardrobe department to hear. My existence, to her, was an inconvenience. But I was a professional inconvenience. I knew every line, every cue, every breath of the lead role, Charlotte. I'd performed it 107 times, mostly to half-empty matinee houses in New York, when Sylvia decided she had a migraine. Tonight was different. This was the London transfer, opening night at the Palladium, the culmination of a year of planning and millions of dollars of investment, and Sylvia had food poisoning. Mark's voice on the phone was a frayed wire of panic. "Iris," he said, "Sylvia's down, she's out. It's bad, you're on." His tone wasn't one of encouragement. It was the sound of a man telling his chauffeur he'd have to drive the Bentley because the Rolls-Royce had a flat tire. There was no "Are you ready?" There was only a grim "You'll have to do." The line that followed is one I will never forget. He said, "Iris, just do the show. Don't try anything new. Don't get creative. Just give us the Sylvia Stone show. The most influential critic in the Western world is in the audience tonight. Just don't embarrass us." He was talking about Alistair Finch, a man whose pen could build a show into a landmark or tear it down into rubble overnight. A man who had famously once written a 6,000-word essay on a single production, concluding that authenticity is the only thing that matters on stage. Everything else, he wrote, is just noise. What Mark didn't know, what Sylvia, in her magnificent self-obsessed ignorance, never bothered to learn, was a secret I had held close for 3 years. The original script for The Last Letter was written by a British playwright, set in 1920s Mayfair, and the role of Charlotte was conceived as a quintessentially English aristocrat. Sylvia, a born and bred Californian, refused to even attempt the dialect. She played Charlotte with the accent of a Beverly Hills socialite, turning a complex, brittle character into a brassy American cliché. The director, Mark, terrified of his star, had allowed it. They had rebuilt the entire production around her limitation, her refusal. What they didn't know is that I am fluent in the dialect. Not just fluent. I was raised on it. My father, a linguist, had drilled me in received pronunciation from the age of 6. To me, it was the sound of bedtime stories and Shakespearean sonnets whispered in the dark. It was the language of my heart. I stood there in my tiny dressing room, the cheap phone hot against my ear, listening to Mark's panicked instructions to be a pale imitation of a woman who was, herself, a pale imitation of the role. I looked at my own reflection in the cracked mirror, and in that moment, a quiet, cold, and beautiful decision began to bloom in the silence of my mind. He wanted the Sylvia Stone show, but London and Alistair Finch were about to get the real thing. It wasn't about revenge, it was about restoration, and as I hung up the phone, I felt a calm settle over me that I hadn't felt in years, the calm of a person who holds a key no one else knows exists. If this story already resonates with you, if you've ever been the one doing all the work in the shadows while someone else takes the credit in the spotlight, let me know in the comments below. It helps to know I'm not just speaking into the void. Your stories, your validation, they mean the world. The door to my dressing room closed with a soft click, shutting out the frantic energy of the backstage hallway. For a moment, the only sound was the thumping of my own heart, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, shocking silence, the silence of opportunity, the silence of terror. 107 times I had gone on for Sylvia. 107 times I had been a carbon copy, a placeholder, a human Xerox machine tasked with replicating a performance I knew, in my bones, was a lie. And every single one of those performances had been a small act of betrayal against myself and against the play itself. My hands began to tremble, not with fear, but with a strange, surging energy. I sat down at the small, cluttered dressing table, my reflection a pale, wide-eyed stranger in the chipped mirror. The weight of the moment pressed down on me. This wasn't a Tuesday matinee in front of a busload of tourists. This was the London Palladium. This was opening night. This was Alistair Finch. My mind, a frantic Rolodex of anxieties, started spinning through the past 3 years, pulling up snapshots of 1,000 tiny humiliations. I remembered the first time Sylvia sabotaged me. It was a full cast run-through in New York, about 6 months into the run. Mark had changed a piece of blocking in the second act, a subtle cross from the fireplace to the window during a key monologue. It was a change designed to give the character a moment of vulnerability, to catch her in the stark moonlight from the window. Sylvia had been told. I, the understudy who was always expected to be watching from the wings, had not. She forgot to mention it. When I stepped in for her that afternoon, I delivered the monologue from the fireplace, just as I had been taught. Mark stopped the rehearsal, his face clouded with annoyance. "Iris," he barked, the window. "We talked about this." The entire cast turned to look at me. I saw the smirk on Sylvia's face as she sat in the darkened house, a queen observing her court. I stammered, "I'm sorry, I wasn't aware of the change." Mark just sighed, a sound heavy with disappointment, as if my ignorance was a personal failing, a sign of my lack of commitment. From that day on, I learned to trust nothing and no one. I became a detective, cross-referencing notes, watching bootleg recordings of the show, talking to the stagehands. I had to build the truth of the performance from scraps because the star and the director wouldn't give it to me whole. Then there was the coffee incident, a small thing, but it was steeped in a particular kind of casual cruelty. I had a secondary, smaller role in the show when I wasn't on for Sylvia, a maid with 2 lines. My costume was a simple, pristine white apron over a black dress. One night, just before my entrance, Sylvia swept past me in the wings, her latte sloshing over the side of its cup. A dark brown stain bloomed across the front of my apron. She didn't break her stride. She just glanced back over her shoulder and said, "Oh, clumsy me. You should really watch where you're standing, dear." I had 30 seconds to my cue. The wardrobe mistress, a saint named Elena, saw the panic in my eyes, ripped the apron off me, and frantically scrubbed at it with a wet wipe, but the damage was done. I went on stage with a faint, damp beige map of Sylvia's carelessness printed on my chest. It felt like a brand. These memories weren't just about me. They were about the violence she did to the play itself. I remembered the day I found the playwright's original script. It was buried in a digital archive folder that no one had bothered to clean out. I had been looking for old production photos for a research project of my own, and there it was, the last letter, original manuscript, .pdf. I clicked it open. It was a scanned copy of the typed pages, complete with handwritten notes in the margins from the author, a brilliant but short-lived writer named Thomas Finchman, who had died tragically young. His notes were a revelation. He described Charlotte not as a diva, but as a woman of brittle elegance and a quiet, desperate strength. He wrote about her accent, specifying a heightened RP, the kind of precise, musical English that was already beginning to fade in the 1920s, a sound both beautiful and obsolete. Sylvia's performance was a sledgehammer to this delicate, nuanced character. She barked where she should have whispered. She bulldozed where she should have glided. She had turned a piece of chamber music into a monster truck rally, and Mark, beholden to her star power, had handed her the keys and a full tank of gas. The sharpest memory, the one that truly drove the nail in, was a visit to my father. He was in a care facility now, his brilliant mind trapped in a body that had betrayed him. He had been a Shakespearean actor in his youth, then a celebrated professor of linguistics. He was the one who had filled my childhood with the sounds of Gielgud and Olivier, who had taught me the difference between the glottal stops of Cockney and the elongated vowels of the aristocracy. I had gone to see him a few months before we left for London. He was sitting in his wheelchair by the window, a book of sonnets open but unread in his lap. He looked at me, his eyes still sharp and clear. He asked me about the show. I told him it was a success, that we were transferring to London. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at me and said, "And you are still this woman's echo. You, with your perfect pitch and your understanding of the text. Why do you content yourself with tracing a ghost?" His words weren't angry, but they were heavy with a disappointment that felt far worse. He quoted Lear, a favorite of his, "Nothing will come of nothing." It was his way of telling me that by hiding my talent, by consenting to be a mere copy, I was creating nothing. I was becoming nothing. I left his room that day with his words echoing in my head, a painful counterpoint to the hollow applause Sylvia received every night. It was a debatable logic, I know, to stay in a job that was slowly erasing me. People would say I should have quit, that I should have stood up for myself, but it was a complicated cocktail of fear, hope, and a misguided loyalty to the art itself. I loved the play, the real play, and I couldn't let it go. I kept thinking, one day, my chance will come. One day they'll see. It was a fool's hope, the logic of a gambler on a losing streak, but it was all I had. That memory of my father, his sad, knowing eyes, became the catalyst. It collided in my mind with the image of Alistair Finch sitting out there in the dark, the one man in London who would understand what I was about to do. And then, a gentle knock on the door. It was Liam, the head stage manager, a lovely, stoic man with a neatly trimmed gray beard and the calmest eyes I'd ever seen. He had been with the London Theatre for 40 years. He'd seen it all. He held a cup of tea in his hands, steam ghosting into the air. He didn't say, "Break a leg." He didn't say, "You can do this." He just looked at me, his gaze steady and direct, and said, "I pulled the original costume sketches for you. The ones Sylvia rejected. Elena is getting them ready." His voice was quiet, a conspirator's murmur. He then added, "It's a shame Mr. Finchman isn't alive to see his play performed properly for once." That was it. That was the spark. That was the permission I didn't know I needed. It wasn't just my secret anymore. Liam knew, Elena knew, the ghost of the playwright knew, and my father, miles away across the ocean, knew. My resolve hardened, not into something hot and angry, but into something cold, clear, and perfectly still, like ice. I took the tea from Liam's hand, my own no longer shaking. "Thank you, Liam," I said, my voice even. He simply nodded, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips, and backed out of the room. I took a sip of the hot, sweet tea. It tasted like courage. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, and the truth was about to have its opening night. The plan wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision born of panic and opportunity. It was a seed I had been unknowingly cultivating for 3 years. It was a quiet, meticulous act of rebellion, carried out in the shadows, a secret scholarship conducted while the star was out getting her nails done. My dressing room table was a mess of makeup and hairpins, but in the bottom drawer, beneath a pile of old scripts, was my real toolkit. It was a heavy black moleskin notebook, my show Bible. Sylvia had a show Bible, of course. It was a sleek, leather-bound affair, mostly filled with press clippings about herself and a few highlighted lines. Mine was different. Mine was a fortress. Over the course of 107 performances, I had filled its pages. It wasn't just my lines. It was a deep-dive analysis of every single moment of the play. I had cross-referenced the original manuscript with historical accounts of 1920s London society. I had mapped Charlotte's emotional journey, not as a series of loud declarations as Sylvia played her, but as a series of subtle fractures in a polished, aristocratic facade. I had notes on breathing, on posture, on the way a woman of that class would hold a teacup, the way she would dismiss a servant with a flick of her eyes, not a wave of her hand. Sylvia played a character. I had reverse-engineered a human being. This secret project was fueled by my conversations with my father. Before his health declined, we would spend hours on the phone. I'd read him a passage from the script, and he, with his linguist's ear, would break it down. "No, Iris," he'd say, "the emphasis there isn't on darling, it's on the silence that follows." The English aristocracy of that period weaponized politeness. The insult is in the omission. He helped me understand that the dialect was more than just an accent. It was a worldview. It was a system of codes, of unspoken rules, of brutal class distinctions hidden behind a veneer of civility. He sent me books on the period, on the Mitford sisters, on the bright young things. He gave me the context, the soil in which the character could grow. So while Sylvia was coasting on her fame, I was in the library. I was listening to archival recordings from the BBC. I was turning myself into a living, breathing expert on a world the rest of the production had deemed irrelevant. My greatest asset, the secret weapon, was my fluency in received pronunciation. It was my father's gift to me. He believed that language was music, and he taught it to me that way. We didn't do drills, we did duets. He'd read a speech from Hamlet in his rich baritone, and I, a little girl with pigtails, would echo it back, mimicking his cadence, his intonation, the precise shape of his vowels. He called it ear training. It was a game to me then, but it became the most valuable skill I possessed. I could hear the subtle differences, the class markers encoded in the way a word like rather or path was pronounced. Sylvia's flat, Californian path grated on me every single night. In my head, I heard my father's voice correcting it, stretching the vowel, making it elegant, making it right. This wasn't a solitary endeavor. I had an ally, a crucial one, Liam, the stage manager. He was a man who loved the theater with a quiet, fierce devotion. He saw what Sylvia was doing to the play, and it pained him. About a year ago, I had taken a risk. I found him in his office after a show, a small, windowless room filled with scripts and scheduling charts. I had my black notebook with me. I said, "Liam, can I show you something?" I was terrified. He was a professional. He owed his loyalty to the production, to the director, to the star, but I had seen the look in his eyes during rehearsals, a quiet flicker of despair. He gestured for me to sit. I opened my notebook. I didn't complain about Sylvia. I didn't whine about my position. I just talked about the play. I talked about Thomas Finchman's notes. I showed him my research. And then I took a deep breath and I read a page of Charlotte's dialogue. I read it in the dialect, with the rhythm and the intention I had been secretly practicing. When I finished, the little office was silent. Liam was staring at me, his face unreadable. I thought I had made a terrible mistake. Then he blinked and said in a low voice, "My God, that's her. That's the woman he wrote." From that moment on, he was my co-conspirator. He gave me access to the theater's archives. He found me the original costume designs, elegant drop-waist silk dresses, and intricate beadwork that Sylvia had rejected as frumpy. He would leave books on my dressing room table, biographies of 1920s actresses, small tokens of encouragement. He never spoke of it openly, but we had an understanding. We were the silent keepers of the play's true flame. The final piece of my leverage, the thing that turned a personal project into a strategic weapon, was Alistair Finch. I was a student of his work. I had read every review he had ever published. I knew his obsessions, his pet peeves. He despised cheap sentimentality and historical inaccuracy. He was a purist, and I remembered one review in particular, a scathing takedown of a revival of a Noel Coward play. The American star had, like Sylvia, refused to adopt a proper accent. Finch had written, "To watch this performance is to watch a masterpiece being vandalized in broad daylight." The text has a rhythm, a specific music that is inextricable from the accent of its era. To ignore that is not a creative choice. It is an act of profound arrogance and artistic cowardice. Authenticity is the only currency the stage accepts, and this production is bankrupt. I had printed that review and taped it to the inside of my notebook. It was my Rosetta Stone. I knew, with absolute certainty, that if I performed the show as Sylvia did, Finch would dismiss me as a pale copy of an already flawed original. He would be bored, at best. But if I gave him authenticity, if I gave him the play he didn't even know he was missing, I wasn't just offering a different performance. I was offering him a story, a discovery, the secret restoration of a lost work of art. My plan was not to mimic Sylvia. My plan was to erase her, to perform the role so completely, so authentically, that it would make her version seem like a cheap knockoff, a forgotten rough draft. As Elena, the wardrobe mistress, came in with a silk dress the color of midnight, a dress I had only ever seen in a sketch, I felt the last vestiges of fear fall away. The time for tracing a ghost was over. It was time to become the real thing. The 5-minute call echoed through the backstage speakers, a final summons. My transformation was complete. I was no longer Iris the understudy. I was wearing a dress that felt like liquid moonlight, a garment of such exquisite, understated elegance that it changed the way I stood, the way I breathed. Elena had worked magic, her needle flying to make the final adjustments. It fit as if it were made for me, because in a way, it had been. It was made for the character I had spent 3 years excavating. My hair was styled in a soft 1920s wave, not the harsh modern look Sylvia favored. The makeup was subtle, emphasizing my eyes, making them look haunted and deep. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time, I saw her. I saw Charlotte. Liam gave me a final nod as I walked towards the wings. The rest of the cast was giving me a wide berth, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. They expected a train wreck. They expected me to be the sacrificial lamb on the altar of Sylvia's bad shellfish. My co-star, a talented but weary actor named Julian who played Charlotte's husband, gave me a tight, sympathetic smile. He whispered, "Just breathe, Iris. We'll get through it." He thought he was helping me. He had no idea what was coming. I took my place in the darkness of the wings. I could hear the murmur of the audience, that great rustling beast on the other side of the curtain. I could smell the familiar scent of dust, paint, and old velvet. My heart was a slow, steady drum. This was the moment, the silent takeover, the first move. The curtain rose. The lights came up on the meticulously recreated Mayfair drawing room. My cue was the first line of the play. I was to be discovered standing by the grand window, looking out into the night. Julian delivered his opening line from across the room, a cheerful, oblivious question about his day. All eyes were on me. 3 years of research. 100 whispered conversations with my father, 1,000 hours of secret practice, all of it funneled down into this single, defining moment. I turned from the window, the light caught my face, I took a breath, and I spoke. My voice, when it came out, was not my own, it was Charlotte's. It was crisp, clear, and perfectly, musically British. The vowel sounds were long and pure, the consonants precise. The line was simple. I thought I saw a storm gathering over the park, but the way I said it, with a hint of weariness, a touch of aristocratic ennui, it landed in the theater with the force of a gunshot. There was a sound from the audience, a collective intake of breath, a ripple of confusion, of surprise. It was a sound I had never heard in a theater before. On stage, Julian froze, his mouth opened slightly. He had been expecting Sylvia's flat, nasal delivery. He was prepared for a tennis match with a familiar partner. I had just served him a cricket ball. For a split second, a flicker of panic crossed his face. But then something amazing happened. He recovered, and he didn't just say his next line. He listened to me, truly listened, and his own performance changed. He responded to the subtlety in my voice with a newfound nuance of his own. The air between us crackled with a chemistry that had never existed with Sylvia. In the back of the house I could picture Mark. I could imagine the blood draining from his face. I could feel his rage and confusion radiating from the darkness of the control booth. This was not the Sylvia Stone show. This wasn't even close. This was an insurrection. He would be on his phone, texting the producers, his thumbs flying in a fury. What is she doing? But he was helpless. The curtain was up. The show was live. He couldn't stop me. The first act unfolded like a dream. Every line I spoke was a quiet revelation. Jokes that had fallen flat with Sylvia's delivery now landed with a dry, ironic wit that sent ripples of laughter through the audience. Moments of pathos that she had bulldozed with melodrama. I played with a brittle, restrained sorrow that was far more powerful. The cast, my fellow actors, were electric. They were awake. For years, they had been sleepwalking through the show, propping up a lazy star. Tonight, they were earning their pay. They were acting, reacting, creating something new and vibrant right there on the stage. And I knew, in the audience, Alistair Finch was watching. I didn't dare look for him, but I could feel his presence. He wasn't getting the show he was expecting to review. He was getting something else entirely. He was getting a story. The understudy who saved the show? No, that was too simple. The understudy who revealed the show for what it was always meant to be. The panic from the director's booth was a palpable force, a wave of negative energy I could feel even under the hot stage lights. During a scene change, as I moved from the drawing room set to the garden, Liam met me in the darkened wings. His face was grim, but his eyes were alight. He pressed a small bottle of water into my hand. "The producers are going ballistic," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the sound of the stagehands. "Mark is losing his mind. He says you're rewriting the play." I took a small sip of water. "I'm not rewriting it, Liam," I whispered back. "I'm restoring it." He gave a sharp, appreciative nod. Then he said, "Sylvia's been calling, non-stop. Apparently, she's well enough to watch a bootleg stream from her hotel room. She's threatening to sue." The idea was so absurd it was almost funny. Sue me for what? For doing my job too well? For honoring the author's intent? It was the desperate flailing of a queen who had just been checkmated. The thought of her, tucked up in her 5-star hotel suite, watching her role, her identity, being claimed by her invisible understudy, gave me a grim surge of satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself again, but the justice of it felt undeniably sweet. The power was shifting, not in a boardroom, but right here in the dust-filled darkness of backstage. The silent takeover was complete. The kingdom was mine. The curtain fell on Act 1 to a sound that stunned the cast into silence. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar, a wave of appreciation so loud and sustained that it felt like a physical force. Julian, my co-star, turned to me, his face slick with sweat, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Iris," he breathed, "what was that?" Intermission was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Usually it was a time for quiet reflection, for notes from the director, for a moment of peace. Tonight, it was a war room. As I walked towards my dressing room, Mark intercepted me. His face was a thundercloud, a mask of pure, undiluted fury. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" he hissed, his voice low and venomous. He pulled me into a small alcove away from the prying eyes of the cast. "I gave you one instruction, Iris. One. Do the show we rehearsed, the show that made millions on Broadway. Who do you think you are?" I looked at him, my heart hammering, but my expression calm. I met his gaze and didn't flinch. I gently but firmly removed his hand from my arm. "I'm doing the show the author wrote, Mark," I said, my voice even. "I'm playing the character as she was written in the script you're supposed to be directing." His jaw tightened. The script was adapted for our star. Sylvia Stone is the star, not you. You are a temp. You are a placeholder. You are going to go out there for the second act and you are going to do it the way you were taught. It was a pivotal moment. The old Iris, the timid, hopeful understudy, would have crumbled. She would have apologized, promised to obey, and gone out there to deliver a soulless imitation. But the old Iris was gone. She had been replaced by the woman who had just held 2,000 people in the palm of her hand. Before I could respond, Liam materialized at my side. He stood between us, a quiet, immovable object. "The first act was the tightest I've seen this show in 3 years, Mark," he said, his voice respectful but firm as iron. "The audience is ecstatic. The producers are getting calls from board members who are in the house. They're telling them not to change a thing." He paused, letting the words sink in. Mark looked from Liam to me, his eyes darting between the unmovable stage manager and the defiant understudy. He saw the truth. He had lost control. The machinery of the show, the very cast and crew he was supposed to command, was now loyal to my performance, not his direction. He was a king without an army. He sputtered, opened his mouth to say something else, then seemed to think better of it. He just shook his head, a look of utter defeat on his face, and stormed off towards his office. The power had shifted. It was no longer a question of whether I would be allowed to continue. It was a question of how high I could fly. Back in my dressing room, Elena was waiting with a fresh cup of tea. She had tears in her eyes. "My girl," she said, her voice thick with a Spanish accent, "you are making art, true art." A message came through on Liam's headset. It was a forward from the lead producer. It was a text from Sylvia, sent just moments before. It read, "Tell her to stop this immediately, or I will sue her for intentional artistic sabotage and defamation of character. She is destroying my brand." Liam showed me the phone. The threat was so preposterous, so drenched in ego and desperation, that I couldn't help but laugh. A short, sharp bark of a laugh. "Defamation of character?" I said. "I'm the one giving the character a good name." This was her desperate counter, the last pathetic move of a dethroned monarch. It was an empty threat, a tantrum broadcast over text message. We both knew it was meaningless. The real power, the real verdict was happening out there, in the buzz of the lobby, in the hushed, excited conversations over expensive glasses of champagne. The audience, our clients, were not just happy, they were thrilled, they were witnesses to an event. They had come to see a star, but they were discovering an artist. Sylvia thought the show was her brand. She had forgotten that the show belonged to the audience, and tonight, the audience had chosen me. The exodus was not of clients from a firm, but of loyalty from a star. It was a quiet, bloodless coup, and the second act hadn't even started yet. I took a sip of tea, the warmth spreading through my chest. The bell rang, signaling the end of intermission. It was time to finish what I had started. The final curtain came down, and then there was a split second of absolute silence, a held breath, and then the sound hit us. It was an explosion, a physical wall of noise, of applause, of shouts, of stomping feet. It wasn't just an ovation, it was a coronation. The entire cast, even those who had looked at me with pity just 2 hours earlier, turned to me with wide, shining eyes. Julian grabbed my hand and squeezed it, his face a mask of joyous disbelief. We took our company bows, the roar of the crowd washing over us. Then, as is tradition, the supporting cast stepped back, leaving the stage for the lead. For me, I walked forward, alone, into the white-hot glare of the spotlights. The applause intensified, a deeply personal, overwhelming wave of sound. I looked out into the darkness, unable to see individual faces, only a vast, roaring sea of humanity, and I bowed. It wasn't a triumphant bow, it was a bow of gratitude. To the audience, to the playwright, to my father, to Liam, to my own stubborn, foolish hope. Backstage was a blur of hugs and tears. Cast members I barely knew were clapping me on the back, telling me it was the best performance they had ever been a part of. The producers, who had been sending panic texts just an hour ago, were now beaming, their faces flushed with the thrill of an unexpected hit. They saw not an artistic triumph, but the dollar signs of rave reviews and sold-out houses. In the midst of the celebration, I saw Mark. He was standing alone, near the fire exit, a forgotten man at his own party. He watched me, his expression a complex cocktail of fury, awe, and bitter resentment. I knew I had to face him. I walked over, the noise of the party fading behind me. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke in a low, clipped tone. "You got lucky, Iris. A fluke. The novelty of it all. They'll be over it by tomorrow." I looked him straight in the eye. All the fear I once had of this man, of his power, of his disapproval, was gone. It had been burned away by the stage lights. I thought of a line from the second act, a moment where Charlotte, finally pushed to her limit, stands up to her bullying husband. The words came to me, unbidden. "Luck," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of the night, "is the residue of design. This was not luck, Mr. Marks. This was preparation." I used the formal address from the play, a final, subtle twist of the knife. I didn't wait for his response. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the shadows. That was our final confrontation. No shouting, no screaming, just a quiet, devastating statement of fact. My vindication wasn't in crushing him. It was in showing him that he had never understood the game at all. The new reality dawned with the morning papers, or rather, with the online editions that published overnight. Liam texted me a link at 6 a.m. It was Alistair Finch's review. My hands trembled as I opened it. The headline was, "A Theatrical Restoration. The Last Letter is Finally Delivered." The review was a masterpiece. Finch didn't just praise my performance, he understood it. He wrote, "For 3 years, audiences on Broadway have been watching a forgery, a loud, gaudy, emotionally hollow caricature of a play. Last night at the Palladium, the understudy, Iris Vance, did not simply save the show, she revealed it. With a performance of breathtaking authenticity and intelligence, she scraped away years of accumulated varnish to reveal the masterpiece underneath. Her command of the period dialect was not a mere technical flourish, it was the key that unlocked the play's soul. This was not an interpretation, it was a reclamation. Authenticity, that rarest of theatrical currencies, is back on the London stage, and its name is Iris Vance." He never mentioned Sylvia by name, only referring to her as the previous star, a dismissal more brutal than any insult. My phone started ringing. It was the lead producer, his voice no longer panicked, but syrupy with admiration. He told me they were calling an emergency meeting with the board. He told me to stay by my phone. An hour later, my agent called, his voice giddy with excitement. They had made an offer, not just the lead role for the entire London run, but a new contract, a new salary that matched Sylvia's, and a clause giving me artistic consultation rights. But the most important call came last. I dialed the number for my father's care facility, my heart in my throat. I got him on the line, his voice frail but clear. I didn't tell him about the contract or the producers, I just read him the review. Alistair Finch's words, the validation I had craved for so long. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. I thought he might have fallen asleep. Then I heard a sound, a rough, choked sob. "I knew it," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. "I knew you had it in you, my girl. You found the music." That was it. That was the real victory. The applause, the contract, the 5-star reviews, they were wonderful, but hearing those words in my father's voice, that was the vindication. The curtain had fallen on Sylvia's reign. My own was just beginning. A few weeks have passed since that night. I'm sitting in what used to be Sylvia's dressing room. It's mine now. I've had it repainted, a calm, soothing shade of gray. The garish pink furniture is gone, replaced by a simple wooden desk and a comfortable armchair. My black moleskine notebook, my show Bible, sits on the corner of the desk, not hidden in a drawer, but displayed like a trophy. There's a quiet knock on the door. It's Liam, with my now customary cup of tea. He sets it down and hands me a memo from the producer's office. "Thought you'd like to see this," he says, a small smile on his face. The memo is short and to the point. Sylvia Stone's contract had been officially terminated, citing a little-known clause about failure to adhere to the artistic integrity of the original text. It was a legal loophole, a convenient excuse they had found to formalize what had already happened. A second memo noted that Mark had been reassigned to direct a non-equity touring production of a tired musical revival. He was, in effect, being exiled. They weren't fired because I demanded it. They were a liability that the production could no longer afford. They were undone by their own arrogance, by their own refusal to see the value in the very thing they were selling. I look around my new domain. My name is on the door. My vision of the show is on the stage every night. We are selling out every single performance. The buzz is real. It's not about the drama of an understudy anymore. It's about the quality of the work. And now, I want to talk to you, the person watching this, because this story, it isn't really about a Broadway show or a snooty critic. It's about every time you've been overlooked, every time you've been told to just do your job and not make waves. Every time your quiet, meticulous work has been overshadowed by someone else's loud, empty confidence. I stayed in that toxic situation for years, telling myself it was loyalty, telling myself it was the only path to my dream. And maybe that was a mistake. Maybe I should have left sooner. That's a debatable point. But the lesson I learned is this. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not to fight them on their terms, but to be so damn good at yours that they become irrelevant. It wasn't about getting revenge on Sylvia. It truly wasn't. It was about proving to myself that the standards my father taught me, the dedication to craft, the belief in authenticity, that it all mattered. It was about taking back my own narrative. It was about honoring the work and, in doing so, honoring myself. The greatest victory isn't watching your enemies fall. It's building a world where they can no longer reach you. If you've ever felt like an understudy in your own life, waiting for a chance to show who you really are, please share your story in the comments. Hearing from you, knowing this resonates, it's the applause that truly matters. Like this video if you found it valuable, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Thank you for listening.